everyone, my name is Sarah, and today we're going to talk about something pretty interesting, I think, and that is that an endangered species has been cloned for the first time in the United States, and this species is actually called the black-footed ferret. I didn't even know that black-footed ferrets were endangered in the first place, but I'm very happy to hear that they are being preserved through this new scientific breakthrough. Let's get started. Scientists have successfully cloned a black-footed ferret that died more than 3 decades ago, making Elizabeth Ann, the moniker for the duplicate ferret, the first native endangered species to be cloned in the United States. So when you clone something, basically you're making an exact copy of the DNA. So basically they are taking the DNA of a ferret that passed away or died 30 years ago and creating a new baby ferret with that ferret's DNA. I think this is very, very cool. And so they're calling the ferret Elizabeth Ann. And so another word for nickname or name is moniker. So the moniker of the duplicate ferret or the second ferret is Elizabeth Ann. So her name is Elizabeth Ann. I think that's so cute. And so she's the first native endangered species to be cloned in the United States. Very cool. Researchers at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute hope to use Elizabeth Ann to reintroduce genetic diversity into the population of black-footed ferrets. Black-footed ferrets were assumed to be extinct in the 1970s due to widespread efforts by farmers to exterminate prairie dogs, which are the main food source for black-footed ferrets. Very cool. So some researchers, some 연구자들, at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, and the Smithsonian is a set of museums in the United States that are run by the federal government. So if you ever go to Washington, D.C., I highly recommend that you take a visit to the Smithsonian Zoo. It is 100% free and it's absolutely beautiful. It's one of my favorite places in Washington. So people who work at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, they wanted to use this clone named Elizabeth Ann to reintroduce genetic diversity into the population. And the reason for that is, we're going to cover it a little bit later, but basically in the 1970s there were almost 0 black-footed ferrets left on this earth. So the byproduct of that is that all of the ferrets that exist right now, they're basically kind of like the great-great-great-grandkids of the same 2 ferrets from almost 50 years ago. And yeah, that's really, really not good for a species to be so, genetically similar to each other. A lot of people and animals can start to have, genetic complications or even congenital deformities when they're born. So yeah, it's very tricky. So it's great because they're able to take this ferret that is no longer with us, but it existed 30 years ago, and introduce her genes back into the population of black-footed ferrets. And so these ferrets, they were assumed to be extinct. So when something is extinct, that means the species is gone. It is no longer existent on this earth. And the reason why people thought that the black-footed ferrets were extinct is because there were efforts by farmers to exterminate or kill prairie dogs. And prairie dogs are the main food source for black-footed ferrets. So because black-footed ferrets eat prairie dogs and the farmers try to kill all of the prairie dogs, the black-footed ferrets have nothing to eat, and unfortunately they would die, which is not very good. However, just over 400 to 500 individuals are keeping the species alive in the wild. However, since all the animals are direct descendants of just 7 individuals discovered in a den in 1981, many of them suffer from inbreeding-related diseases such as sylvatic plague and canine distemper. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that all of the ferrets, or the black-footed ferrets currently alive on planet Earth, they're basically the great-great-great-grandkids or the direct descendants of 7 ferrets that were discovered in 1981. That's 40 years ago. And so because, they've all just been having babies with each other and, not really meeting a lot of other black-footed ferrets, a lot of them are actually family with each other, and when you have babies with someone in your family, it's called inbreeding. It's kind of a taboo subject. But inbreeding can lead to a lot of diseases such as sylvatic plague and canine distemper. So these are mainly diseases that affect animals, but there are also diseases that can affect humans too. So if you want to look into this, you can look up the family, the Habsburgs, from the Holy Roman Empire in Europe in like the 1700s. And back then in Europe, they didn't know that inbreeding was a bad thing. They wanted to keep their blood pure, whatever that means. So like cousins would marry cousins, and then they would have babies, and then those babies would marry their cousins, and it was just a mess. And eventually, it was just really, really bad. And a lot of the people in the royal family were like very disabled, or they had, physical, mental handicaps. It's just really bad. So it can happen with humans, it can happen with animals, it can definitely happen with ferrets. So that's why it's so important that Elizabeth Ann is introducing some genetic diversity, kind of mix things up in the pool of black-footed ferrets. This cloned individual has no living descendants in the population, Mark Marinari told Smithsonian Magazine. If she produces kits and we can properly harness her genetic diversity, it will absolutely benefit the species. The more genetic diversity we have, the better. So because Elizabeth Ann has no living descendants in the population, so none of the ferrets that are currently alive are related to her at all, if she produces kits or ferret babies, it will be very helpful for the species, because the more genetic diversity we have, the better. However, although the cloning project has so far proven to be a success, it is not a conservation panacea. According to Christy Bly, a biologist that worked on the project, the successful cloning of Elizabeth Ann is another landmark of firsts that will ultimately contribute to its long-term persistence. To achieve recovery, however, this scientific advance must be accompanied by a dogged commitment to conserving and increasing existing black-footed ferret populations in the wild. Very cool. So it's great that this experiment has worked. They were able to clone this ferret and reintroduce some genetic diversity back into the population. However, according to this woman, Christy Bly, who worked on the project, she said that it is not a conservation panacea. And so this word panacea, its literal definition is a medicine that will cure any disease. So pan, that means all, and then acea, I think that means medicine, so all medicine. So we can't just, assume that this cloning project will work totally on its own and that we don't have to do anything else. That's not what we should do. So according to Professor Bly, she says that even though this is a landmark, so it's very, very important, it's kind of marking the beginning and end of an era in black-footed ferret conservation, we have to be persistent. To achieve recovery of the species so that it's no longer endangered, this scientific advance, so the technology associated with cloning, has to be accompanied by a dogged commitment to conserving the existing population. So when something is dogged, it means you have to work really, really hard for a really long time. So consistent and intense over a very long period of time. Because, it takes a very long time, unfortunately, to restore an entire species when they were on the brink of extinction. Very interesting. So, that is all for today's article. I hope that you guys found it to be interesting. I did not know that we could clone ferrets. Didn't know that was a thing that we could do or that we wanted to do. But I'm certainly happy to hear that cute little Elizabeth Ann is helping her species to survive and hopefully live long into the future. Alright, well, if any of you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, make sure to let me know in the comment section below. And I will see you guys all again next week. Alright, bye!